In a remote farming community outside Sedalia, Missouri, during the summer of 1867, the most disturbing medical case study ever documented in the American Midwest would center on 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell. 3 leather-bound journals were filled with observations by the region's only physician, Dr. Samuel Harding, detailing a child whose behavior defied every principle of human nature known to 19th-century medicine. To casual observers, the boy appeared normal, even charming. But beneath this innocent exterior lay something that the medical science of the era simply could not explain. Over the course of 6 months, 3 people died in accidents around Timothy Caldwell, along with dozens of farm animals found dead under mysterious circumstances. 11 people in total had all in some way crossed paths with a child whose smile never reached his pale blue eyes. Sealed by local authorities, the official records were hidden away for over a century. But the truth about Timothy Caldwell reveals a darkness that challenges everything we thought we knew about the capacity for evil in childhood. Before we continue with the story of Timothy Caldwell and the terror that gripped Sedalia County, if this story intrigues you, make sure to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. We also love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts around the world, so please let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. The events that would make Timothy Caldwell infamous began not with violence, but with loss. From the wounds of civil war, the Missouri of 1867 was a state still bleeding. To die on distant battlefields, towns like Sedalia had sent their young men, leaving behind widows, orphans, and communities struggling to rebuild. Nestled in a valley 15 miles south of town, the Caldwell farm had once been prosperous. With dreams of raising cattle and corn, James and Martha Caldwell had built their homestead, but those dreams died with James at the Battle of Wilson's Creek in 1861. Alone, Martha tried to maintain the farm, but in the bitter winter of 1865, consumption took her lungs. Their son, Thomas, barely 21, inherited land he couldn't work and debts he couldn't pay. When word arrived that his brother William had died at Andersonville prison, leaving behind a widow and 8-year-old son, Thomas saw both burden and opportunity. A home would be needed by the boy Timothy, and with the endless work of farming, Thomas needed help. A hard man made harder by war and loss, Thomas Caldwell had a wife, Sarah, who had grown sharp-tongued and bitter during their childless years. For raising a child, neither was particularly suited, especially one who arrived at their door in the spring of 1866, carrying nothing but a small cloth bag and eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Small for his age, Timothy Caldwell had pale skin that burned easily in the Missouri sun, and blonde hair that his Aunt Sarah kept cut short to keep the lice away. Of his life before the farm, he spoke little, offering only fragments when pressed. A soldier had been his father. His mother had coughed blood. With neighbors for a while after she died, he had lived. What struck adults most was his politeness. "Yes, sir," and "yes, he always said. About work or punishment, he never complained. In every way, he seemed to be the model of a well-behaved child. In June of 1866, Dr. Samuel Harding first encountered Timothy when the boy accompanied his uncle to town for supplies. A graduate of the Missouri Medical College and one of the few formally trained physicians west of St. Louis, Harding had developed a keen eye for reading people during his years treating both Union and Confederate soldiers. Something about the Caldwell boy unsettled him, though he couldn't identify what. The child was perfectly respectful, Harding would later write in his journal. He answered questions directly, maintained appropriate eye contact, and displayed none of the fidgeting or shyness typical of rural children encountering strangers. Yet, I found myself deeply uncomfortable in his presence. An intensity was held in his gaze that seemed to suggest he was studying me with the same clinical interest that I typically reserved for my patients. Small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business was the farming community around Sedalia. Isolated, but not so isolated that neighbors didn't notice things, was the Caldwell farm. Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, whose property bordered the Caldwell land, would often see Timothy working in the fields or tending to the livestock. That the boy worked with unusual focus for a child his age, never seeming to tire, never stopping to play or rest, as children naturally do, was something she remarked to her husband. It was like watching a little machine, she told her husband Samuel over dinner one evening. He'd worked steady from sunrise to sunset, never complaining, never slowing down. Ain't natural for a boy to have no play in him at all. Chickens were kept by the Patterson farm, and Eleanor noticed that her birds became agitated whenever Timothy was near the property line. Together they would cluster, squawking and ruffling their feathers, refusing to venture close to the fence that separated the properties. As coincidence, her husband dismissed it, but the feeling that the animals sensed something about the boy that humans missed was something Eleanor couldn't shake. On a sweltering afternoon in August 1866, the first death occurred. The daughter of the town blacksmith, little Mary Fletcher, age 5, was known throughout the community for her bright laugh and tendency to wander. Near Willow Creek, a shallow stream that ran between several properties, including the Caldwell farm, she had been playing. Her body was found by Timothy. Just as the family was preparing for supper, he arrived at the Fletcher home, his clothes damp and his face pale with what appeared to be genuine distress. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious agitation. "I found Mary by the creek. She's not breathing." Face down in water barely 18 inches deep, the search party that rushed to the creek found Mary Fletcher. A tragic but not uncommon accident in rural areas where children played unsupervised near water was what Dr. Harding, summoned immediately, determined. Not the death itself, but Timothy's account of discovering the body was what troubled Harding. An unusually detailed description of exactly where Mary had been found, the position of her body, and the condition of her clothing was provided by the boy. About how he had come to be in that particular spot at that particular time, when pressed, Timothy explained that he had been looking for a lost calf. The boy's recall was remarkably precise, Harding noted in his journal. He could describe the exact position of the deceased child's limbs, the way her dress had been caught on a submerged branch, even the color of the water around her face. For a child who claimed to be frightened and upset by the discovery, such attention to detail seemed unusual. That one of their calves had indeed gone missing that morning, and that he had sent Timothy to search the creek area, was confirmed by Thomas Caldwell when questioned. Healthy and grazing in a meadow nearly a mile from where Mary Fletcher had drowned, the calf was found 2 days later. With gratitude, the Fletcher family, devastated by their loss, received Timothy's sympathy. He had, after all, been the one to find their daughter and alert them immediately. Quietly with his aunt and uncle, Timothy sat at the funeral. Respectfully throughout the service, his head was bowed. With appropriate solemnity, he accepted their gratitude when the family thanked him for his quick action in alerting them. "I wish I could have found her sooner," he told Mary's father, his voice carrying just the right note of regret and sorrow. But something that nagged at her for days afterward was noticed by Eleanor Patterson, watching from across the church. When Mary Fletcher's mother collapsed in grief during the service, when the sight of the small coffin reduced grown men to tears, Timothy Caldwell's expression never changed. In apparent sorrow, his head was bowed, but when he thought no one was looking, his pale blue eyes remained dry and watchful, taking in every detail of the scene around him. 3 weeks later, the second death came. At the bottom of a rocky outcrop known locally as Devil's Bluff, old Henrik Larsson, a Norwegian immigrant who had worked as a logger before arthritis forced him into retirement, was found. The bluff overlooked the creek where Mary Fletcher had drowned, and regularly to check on the wild beehives he tended, Henrik was known to climb there. Once again, Timothy Caldwell was involved in the discovery. When he spotted something unusual at the base of the bluff, he had been walking home from town. "I saw Mr. Larson's hat caught on a thorn bush," Timothy told the gathering crowd. "I called out to him, but got no answer, so I climbed down to look. His neck broken from what appeared to be a fall from the top of the 40-foot bluff. Henrik Larson was dead. That the old man had likely died instantly upon impact was revealed by Dr. Harding's examination. The presence of several dead bees scattered around the body, far more than would typically be found away from a hive, was the only unusual aspect of the scene. Those bluffs, Mr. Larson knew better than any man in the county, Samuel Patterson told Dr. Harding after the examination. For 3 years, he'd been climbing up there. Never had so much as a stumble. Don't make sense he'd fall now. That perhaps the old man had been stung by bees and lost his footing was suggested by Timothy when questioned. "He was always talking about how angry they get when you disturb them," the boy said. "Maybe they swarmed him and he got confused." Plausible, Dr. Harding found Timothy's explanation, but something about the scene bothered him. Directly around Henrik's body, the dead bees were all clustered in a small area. If the old man had disturbed a hive at the top of the bluff, there should have been more evidence of bee activity along his presumed path of flight and fall. Instead, it appeared as though the bees had somehow been concentrated around the impact site. Intact and showing no signs of recent disturbance, when Harding climbed to the top of the bluff to examine the beehives, he found them active but not agitated. The worker bees were going about their normal business of gathering nectar from the late summer wildflowers. Any illusions about coincidence were shattered by the third death. In September 1866, 6-year-old Jacob Mills vanished while playing in the woods near his family's cabin. In an abandoned well nearly half a mile from where he had last been seen, his body was found 4 days later. To join the search party, Timothy Caldwell had volunteered. For 3 days, Timothy searched alongside the adult volunteers, showing remarkable endurance for a child his age. Intimately, he seemed to know the woods, guiding searchers through areas that even longtime residents found difficult to navigate. When asked how he had learned the terrain so well, Timothy explained that during his free time, he often explored the woods, looking for useful plants and herbs that his aunt could use for cooking and medicine. Just after dawn on the 4th day, Timothy appeared at the Mills cabin. "I think I found something," he told Jacob's father, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "There's an old well about a half-mile north of here. I heard what sounded like crying." By fallen logs and overgrown brush, the well was partially concealed. Alive but barely conscious, suffering from dehydration and exposure, Jacob Mills was at the bottom. Immediately, Dr. Harding was summoned, but within hours of being pulled from the well, the boy died, his small body unable to recover from the ordeal. The child had been at the bottom of that well for nearly 4 days, Harding wrote in his journal. Troubling questions are raised by the fact that Timothy Caldwell was able to locate him in such an obscure location. How extensive is the boy's knowledge of the local terrain? What other hidden dangers might he be aware of? More troubling still was Timothy's behavior during Jacob's final hours. Around their dying son, while the Mills family maintained a vigil, Timothy sat quietly in the corner of the cabin, apparently praying. But something that deeply disturbed him was seen by Dr. Harding, positioned where he could observe the boy without being noticed. Timothy wasn't praying. Moving were his lips, but with an intensity that seemed almost scientific, his eyes were fixed on Jacob Mills. Every detail of the dying child's condition, he appeared to be cataloguing: the labored breathing, the pale skin, the way consciousness flickered in and out. When Jacob finally died, Timothy's expression showed no grief or shock. Instead, there was something that Harding could only describe as satisfaction. An excuse to visit the abandoned well where Jacob had been found was made by Dr. Harding after the funeral. For reasons he couldn't articulate, the sight troubled him. Indeed well hidden, the well was concealed by natural debris that would have taken considerable effort to move. Yet Timothy had claimed to hear crying from this location, a claim that seemed improbable given the depth of the well and the amount of brush covering it. More carefully, as Harding examined the scene, he noticed something that the initial rescue party had missed in their urgency to save Jacob Mills. With unusual precision, around the rim of the well, the debris had been arranged. Logs and branches that should have fallen randomly showed signs of deliberate placement, creating a natural-looking camouflage that would be nearly impossible to spot unless one knew exactly where to look. Too disturbing to voice aloud were the implications, but the suspicion that Jacob Mills had not simply fallen into the well was something Harding could not shake. Someone had placed him there, and someone had carefully concealed the location until the boy was too weak to survive rescue. That evening, Harding began keeping detailed notes about Timothy Caldwell. If his suspicions were correct, the boy posed a danger to the entire community. But suspicions were not evidence, and evidence was exactly what Harding lacked. The problem was that Timothy Caldwell was by all appearances a model child. Regularly with his aunt and uncle, he attended church, sitting quietly through services and reciting prayers with appropriate reverence. Diligently on the farm, he worked, completing tasks that would challenge many adult workers. Respectfully to his elders, he spoke and showed proper deference to authority figures. Most importantly, Timothy had plausible explanations for his presence at each tragedy. He had been looking for a lost calf when he found Mary Fletcher. He had been walking home from town when he spotted Henrik Larsson's hat. He had volunteered to help search for Jacob Mills, as any concerned member of the community would do. But to look beyond surface appearances, Dr. Harding's medical training had taught him. In treating wounded soldiers, he had learned to recognize the signs of men who killed not from patriotic duty or desperate necessity, but from something darker and more fundamental. A coldness in such men existed, a disconnection from normal human emotion that manifested in subtle ways, too little reaction to horror, too much interest in suffering, an ability to discuss violence with clinical detachment. All of these characteristics were displayed by Timothy Caldwell, but compressed into the body and face of an 8-year-old child. In earnest in October 1866, Dr. Harding's investigation began. Using his position as the community's physician, he made regular visits to farms and homes throughout the area, ostensibly checking on the health of families still recovering from the hardships of war. About Timothy Caldwell, he was gathering information in reality. A disturbing picture of a child who seemed to exist at the center of an ever-widening circle of misfortune was what he discovered painted. At unusual rates, livestock on neighboring farms had been dying, not from disease, but from what appeared to be accidental injuries. With broken necks, apparently killed by foxes that left no other signs of predation, chickens were found. Mysterious wounds that became infected and led to death were suffered by pigs. Sudden lameness that forced farmers to put them down was developed by horses. To Dr. Harding, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson confided that she had lost 17 chickens in the past 2 months. "It's the strangest thing," she said. "They're dying 1 or 2 at a time, always found in the morning with their necks broken clean. My husband thinks it's foxes, but I've never seen fox sign around the coop. And the way they're killed, it's too neat, too." That supported Eleanor's suspicions. When Harding examined the most recent casualties, he found evidence. With precise force applied to specific points on their necks, a technique that required considerable knowledge of anatomy, the chickens had been killed. It was not the random violence typical of predator attacks, but something much more deliberate and controlled. On other farms, similar patterns emerged. To what he described as freak accidents, James Wickham had lost 3 calves, animals that had somehow managed to strangle themselves on ropes or wedge their heads in fence rails in ways that defied logical explanation. Despite being one of the most sure-footed animals in the county, Robert Dunham's prize bull had fallen into a ditch and broken its leg. In every case, the affected farms were within walking distance of the Caldwell property, and in several instances, neighbors reported seeing Timothy in the vicinity around the time of the incident. "I saw him walking along our fence line the morning before we found the calf," James Wickham told Dr. Harding. "Thought it was odd, him being so far from home, but the boy was always polite when he saw me, waved, and called out a greeting like he was taught proper." To Timothy's behavior during his routine medical visits to the Caldwell farm, Dr. Harding also began paying closer attention. During these visits, the boy was always present, standing quietly while Dr. Harding examined his aunt and uncle for the various ailments common to farming life. But that Timothy watched these examinations with unusual interest, asking questions about anatomy and medical procedures that seemed advanced for a child his age, was noticed by Harding. "How do you know if someone's really dead?" Timothy asked during one visit, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. "Sometimes people just look like they're sleeping." When pressed to explain his curiosity, Timothy said he was concerned about being able to help if someone was hurt while he was alone on the farm. "Uncle Thomas says I need to know how to handle emergencies since we're so far from town," he explained. Reasonable was the explanation, but something about the question disturbed Dr. Harding. A clinical quality to Timothy's interest in death and injury existed that went beyond normal childhood curiosity. About the mechanics of dying, how long it took, what signs to look for, whether people could survive various types of trauma, the boy asked with the same detached interest that a medical student might show when studying cadavers. During these conversations, Harding began testing Timothy's knowledge with deliberately false information, claiming that certain injuries were fatal when they were not, or that specific symptoms indicated particular conditions. Directly, Timothy never challenged these false statements. But that the boy filed away every piece of information with remarkable retention was noticed by Harding. More disturbing still was Timothy's response to Dr. Harding's stories about treating wounded soldiers during the war. With rapt attention, while most children showed appropriate shock or sadness when hearing about battlefield injuries, Timothy listened, asking detailed questions about wound patterns, blood loss, and survival rates. "Did they scream a lot when you cut off their arms?" Timothy asked during one such conversation, his pale blue eyes fixed intently on Dr. Harding's face. "Or were they too hurt to make noise?" Delivered in Timothy's characteristically polite tone, the question sent a chill through Dr. Harding that he would never forget. By November 1866, Dr. Harding had filled nearly 2 complete journals with observations about Timothy Caldwell. Of a child who possessed an adult's understanding of violence and death, combined with a complete absence of normal human empathy, the picture that emerged was that. But documentation was not the same as evidence. And evidence was what Harding would need if he hoped to protect the community from what he increasingly believed was a dangerous predator. When Thomas Caldwell injured his back during the fall harvest, the opportunity to gather that evidence came. Bed rest and daily medical visits were required by the injury, giving Dr. Harding unprecedented access to the Caldwell household. During these visits, he began engaging Timothy in longer conversations, carefully probing to understand the extent of the boy's knowledge and the nature of his thoughts. What he discovered exceeded his worst fears. On living creatures for months, possibly years, Timothy Caldwell had been conducting experiments. Using a combination of careful questioning and direct observation, Dr. Harding determined that the boy had been systematically capturing and torturing small animals, studying their responses to various forms of injury and distress. During one of their conversations, Timothy had mentioned the cave, describing it as a place where he went to think and be alone. When Dr. Harding investigated the site, he found a carefully organized collection of animal bones, crude surgical instruments fashioned from farm tools, and a series of detailed drawings that documented various experiments in torture and mutilation. The most disturbing discovery was the drawings. Rendered with surprising artistic skill for a child, they showed rabbits, squirrels, birds, and larger animals in various stages of dissection and injury. In Timothy's careful handwriting, each drawing was accompanied by notes describing the animal's reactions, the time it took to die, and observations about which methods caused the most suffering. Subject remained conscious for approximately 10 minutes after removal of eyes, read one notation beside a detailed drawing of a rabbit. Vocalizations decreased gradually. Movement ceased after application of pressure to throat. That Timothy had been using the community's animals as subjects for increasingly sophisticated experiments in cruelty was realized by Dr. Harding. The result of Timothy's desire to test his methods on larger subjects were actually the accidental deaths on neighboring farms. But a newer set of drawings that showed human figures instead of animals was the most chilling discovery. These sketches depicted children and adults in various poses of distress and injury. Each was accompanied by speculative notes about human anatomy and potential methods of causing harm. Unmistakably, Mary Fletcher, the first child to die, was shown in one drawing as a figure. Henrik Larsson was depicted in another. With detailed annotations about the effects of dehydration and exposure on the human body, a third showed Jacob Mills at the bottom of a well. Simply present when these people died, Timothy Caldwell had not been. He had planned their deaths, executed those plans with methodical precision, and documented the results for future study. As Dr. Harding would soon discover, far from over was the horror in Sedalia County. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. An impossible situation was faced by Dr. Harding. 4 multiple deaths, the evidence in the cave proved that Timothy Caldwell was responsible, but that evidence had been obtained through what amounted to an illegal search. Moreover, the idea that an 8-year-old child could be a calculating murderer was so far outside the accepted understanding of human nature that no court would accept such a claim. For understanding antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, the medical science of 1867 had no framework. The prevailing belief was that children were inherently innocent, corrupted only by bad influences or traumatic experiences. To most people, the idea that a child could be born without the capacity for empathy or moral reasoning was literally inconceivable. That if he presented his findings to local authorities, he would likely be dismissed as a man whose mind had been damaged by too many years of treating war casualties, Dr. Harding knew. The evidence would be explained away. As a traumatized orphan acting out his grief, Timothy would be defended, and the killings would continue. Instead, to confront Timothy directly, Dr. Harding decided. During his next visit to the Caldwell farm, he asked the boy to walk with him to check on the livestock in the far pasture. Once they were alone, what he had discovered in the cave was revealed by Dr. Harding. Not what Dr. Harding had expected was Timothy's reaction. The boy showed no surprise, no denial, no fear at being caught. Instead, he listened calmly as Dr. Harding described the drawings and notes, occasionally nodding as if confirming the accuracy of the doctor's observations. "You're not going to tell anyone," Timothy said when Dr. Harding finished speaking. It was not a question or a plea, but a statement of fact delivered with absolute confidence. "Why wouldn't I?" Dr. Harding asked, genuinely curious about the boy's reasoning. The first genuine expression of emotion that Dr. Harding had ever seen on his face, Timothy smiled. "Because no one would believe you," he said. "And because you're curious about what I'll do next." On both counts, the boy was right. That his claims would sound like the ravings of a man losing his sanity, Dr. Harding knew. But something that the doctor was reluctant to admit, even to himself, had also been identified by Timothy: a scientific fascination with observing the development of what might be the most dangerous human being he had ever encountered. "How long have you been doing this?" Dr. Harding asked. "Since I was 5, Timothy replied matter-of-factly. "Maybe earlier. I started with insects, then mice, then bigger things. It's interesting to see how different animals react to the same treatments. And the people who died." Timothy shrugged. "They were experiments, too. I wanted to see if people would react the same way as animals. They do, mostly, but they're better at understanding what's happening to them. That makes it more interesting." A chill that had nothing to do with the November air was felt by Dr. Harding. "What are you planning to do next?" Seriously, before answering, Timothy considered the question. "I need to find out what happens when you hurt someone who trusts you completely. Someone who wouldn't suspect anything until it was too late." Clear was the implication. Timothy was planning to kill his aunt and uncle. That he had perhaps days, possibly only hours, before Timothy acted on his plans, Dr. Harding knew. With the casual confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable, the boy had revealed his intentions, and past experience suggested that once he had decided on a course of action, Timothy did not delay. That evening, Dr. Harding visited Sheriff William Crawford in Sedalia. A practical man who had served with distinction in the Union Army and had little patience for theories or speculation, Crawford was. But he also trusted Dr. Harding's judgment and was willing to listen to evidence regardless of how unusual the circumstances might be. Carefully, Dr. Harding presented his case, focusing on verifiable facts rather than psychological theories. He showed Crawford the drawings and notes from the cave, pointed out the pattern of deaths and accidents surrounding Timothy, and documented the boy's unusual knowledge of anatomy and violence. Most importantly, Timothy's stated intention to kill his aunt and uncle was revealed by Dr. Harding. This was information that could not be ignored, regardless of the source. "Even if half of what you're telling me is true," Sheriff Crawford said after reviewing the evidence, examining each disturbing drawing with growing alarm, "we can't arrest a child for drawings and suspicions. But we can watch him, and we can be ready to act if he tries anything." The anatomical precision of Timothy's sketches was studied by Crawford, noting details that even his experience as a Civil War veteran hadn't prepared him for. 4 hours, the two men spent developing their strategy, bringing in Crawford's most trusted deputies, men who had served under him during the war and could be counted on to remain steady under pressure. A comprehensive plan was developed by Dr. Harding and Sheriff Crawford. At his usual time, Dr. Harding would arrive at the Caldwell farm, bringing laudanum ostensibly for Thomas's pain management, but actually to keep both Thomas and Sarah sedated enough to prevent Timothy from harming them easily. Strategically around the farm property, Sheriff Crawford and his deputies would position themselves, close enough to respond quickly, but far enough away to avoid detection. The following morning, the plan was put into effect. As Dr. Harding approached the farmhouse in his buggy, he noticed immediately that something was different. The usual morning sounds of farm activity, chickens pecking in the yard, pigs grunting in their pen, were absent. An unsettling quiet that made his skin crawl was held by the property. Before Dr. Harding had even climbed down from his buggy, Timothy appeared in the doorway. Perfectly still, the boy stood, his pale blue eyes tracking the doctor's movements with predatory focus. He was dressed in his usual work clothes, but that Timothy's sleeves were rolled up past his elbows, and his hands appeared to have been scrubbed recently, the kind of thorough cleaning that suggested preparation for messy work, was noticed by Dr. Harding. "Good morning, Dr. Harding," Timothy said, his voice carrying its characteristic politeness. But something underneath had changed. An anticipation was there, an excitement that the boy was struggling to contain. "I've been waiting for you." A chill through Dr. Harding was sent by the words. That he had been expecting this visit, had perhaps even been counting on it as part of whatever plan he had set in motion, was suggested by Timothy's use of waiting. Inside the house, Dr. Harding found Thomas and Sarah Caldwell in their bedroom, both apparently sleeping peacefully. But as he approached Thomas's bed to check his condition, he noticed that the man's breathing was unusually shallow, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that suggested more than natural sleep. "What did you give them?" Dr. Harding asked quietly, not turning to look at Timothy, but knowing the boy was watching every move he made. "Just some herbs I found in the woods," Timothy replied, his tone innocent, but his choice of words deliberate. "There are so many interesting plants growing wild around here. Some of them have very, very useful properties." Weak but steady was Thomas's pulse when Dr. Harding checked it. Similar symptoms were shown by Sarah. Deeply unconscious but still alive, she was. Careful about the dosage, whatever Timothy had used, he had been. Helpless but alive, at least for now, the boy wanted his victims. "They're not going to wake up for several hours," Timothy continued conversationally. "That should give us plenty of time to talk without interruption." Unlike anything Dr. Harding had ever experienced was the conversation that followed. About murder and torture with the clinical detachment of a medical professor discussing anatomy, Timothy spoke. His experiments on animals and humans with scientific precision were described by him, explaining his methodologies and the insights he had gained from each death. "Mary Fletcher taught me that drowning is actually quite slow," Timothy said, settling into a chair as if beginning a pleasant afternoon chat. "Everyone thinks people just slip under the water and disappear, but that's not how it works at all. There's struggling and panic and this interesting pattern of breathing attempts before the person finally gives up. I had to hold her down for almost 3 minutes before she stopped fighting." His blood turn to ice was felt by Dr. Harding. "You held her under the water?" Eagerly, Timothy nodded. "She was playing by the creek, and I told her I'd found a pretty stone on the bottom. When she bent over to look, I just pushed her head down and held it there. She was so small that it didn't take much strength, but she fought harder than I expected. That's when I realized that people have much stronger survival instincts than animals." "And Henrik Larsson, that was more complicated," Timothy admitted. "I couldn't overpower him physically, so I had to be more creative. I knew he checked his beehives every Thursday morning, so I went up to the bluff the night before and loosened some of the stones along the edge. Then I collected bees from one of his hives and put them in a cloth bag." As he described his methodology, Timothy's eyes gleamed. "When Mr. Larsson climbed up to check the hives, I was waiting behind some rocks. I threw the bag of bees at his face and started shouting that there was a massive swarm attacking him. He panicked and stumbled backward right over the edge where I'd weakened the stone barrier. The fall killed him instantly, just like I calculated it would." "And Jacob Mills?" "Jacob was the most interesting of all," Timothy said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher sharing a particularly fascinating lesson. "I didn't kill him quickly like the others. I wanted to see what would happen if someone died slowly over several days. So, I convinced him to follow me into the woods by telling him I'd found a family of baby raccoons." Timothy paused, seeming to savor the memory. Jacob was so concerned about the imaginary baby animals that he didn't think twice about the danger. "I helped him climb down into the well. Then, I moved the logs and brush to cover the opening. I visited him every day for 4 days, bringing him just enough water to keep him alive, but not enough to let him recover his strength." That Timothy was no longer speaking hypothetically about future experiments was realized by Dr. Harding. The boy had specific plans, and those plans clearly included the people currently in the house. "What are you planning to do with your aunt and uncle?" Dr. Harding asked directly. Broader than Dr. Harding had ever seen it, Timothy's genuine smile returned. "That's where you come in, Dr. Harding. See, all of my previous experiments have been with people who didn't know what was happening to them until it was too late. But you're different. You understand exactly what I am and what I'm capable of. That makes you the perfect subject for a completely new type of study. As Timothy spoke, he began moving around the room, gathering items that Dr. Harding recognized as potential weapons: rope from the barn, a heavy candlestick from the mantelpiece, several sharp kitchen implements. With methodical precision, as if preparing for surgery, the boy organized his tools. "I want to find out what happens when someone who knows they're going to die tries to save people they care about," Timothy continued, his excitement growing. "Will you sacrifice yourself to save Uncle Thomas and Aunt Sarah? Will you try to fight me even though you know I've planned for that possibility? Will you try to run away and abandon them to save yourself?" That the time for conversation had passed, Dr. Harding knew. Enough of his plans had been revealed by Timothy to make clear that everyone in the house was in immediate mortal danger. From his medical bag, he drew the pistol and pointed it at the boy. "Step away from the knives, Timothy," Dr. Harding said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. At the pistol with interest rather than fear, Timothy looked. "That's a Navy Colt, isn't it?" he asked conversationally. "I've seen pictures of them in books about the war. How many bullets does it hold?" "6, Dr. Harding replied automatically, then immediately regretted providing the information. "And how many people are you trying to protect?" Timothy asked. "There's Uncle Thomas, Aunt Sarah, yourself, and presumably the 3 law enforcement officers outside. That's 6 people, if my counting is correct. So, even if you shoot me, you'll have used up all your ammunition." Closer, Timothy moved, no longer bothering to stay out of pistol range. "You want to know how I became what I am," he said, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "You want to understand whether I was born this way or whether something made me this way. You want to know if there are others like me and how to recognize them before they start killing." Each statement was true, and as frightening as his capacity for violence was Timothy's ability to identify and exploit Dr. Harding's intellectual curiosity. Enough to predict their behavior and manipulate their responses. Even when they knew they were being manipulated, the boy understood people well. As Timothy approached his sleeping uncle with a length of rope in his hands, the confrontation came. To intervene, Dr. Harding stepped forward, but with surprising speed and strength, Timothy moved, producing the kitchen knife and slashing at the doctor's arm. Brief but violent was the struggle that followed. With the desperate ferocity of a cornered animal, Timothy fought, using the knife with skill that spoke of considerable practice. Smaller and weaker than Dr. Harding, the boy was, but he was also faster and more agile, and with the calculated precision of someone who had studied anatomy extensively, he fought. Timothy's wrist was managed to be grabbed by Dr. Harding and twisted until the boy dropped the knife, but immediately from his clothing, Timothy produced another blade. That the boy had prepared multiple weapons and positioned them strategically throughout the house became clear. From their concealed positions, the sound of their fight brought Sheriff Crawford and his deputies running. Through the back door, they burst to find Dr. Harding struggling with Timothy while Thomas and Sarah Caldwell lay unconscious on their bed, apparently unaware of the violence occurring around them. While Dr. Harding caught his breath and checked on the unconscious couple, Deputy Mitchell quickly subdued Timothy. When the dust settled, Timothy Caldwell sat calmly in the corner of the room, his clothes torn and his face blooded, but his pale blue eyes still holding that same cold intelligence that had first disturbed Dr. Harding so many months earlier. "You can't prove anything," Timothy said as the deputies secured him with ropes. "Nobody will believe that a child did all those things." With a mixture of disgust and fascination, Sheriff Crawford looked down at the boy. "Maybe not," he said. "But we don't have to prove everything. Attempting to murder your family is enough to see you locked up regardless of your age." At that, Timothy smiled. The same genuine expression of emotion that Dr. Harding had seen the day before. "You won't hang me," he said with absolute confidence. "I'm too young. And I'm too interesting. Someone will want to study me instead." Just when we thought we'd seen it all, The horror in Sedalia County intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what happens next. About his fate, Timothy Caldwell was wrong, but about the impossibility of proving his crimes, he was right. When Sheriff Crawford attempted to present the evidence from the cave to county prosecutors, he encountered exactly the resistance that Dr. Harding had predicted. As the products of a disturbed child acting out trauma from his parents' deaths, the drawings and notes were dismissed. To coincidence compounded by Timothy's unfortunate habit of being helpful during emergencies, the pattern of accidents and deaths was attributed. However, the attempted murder of Thomas and Sarah Caldwell could not be explained away. With clear intent to kill, 3 law enforcement officers had witnessed Timothy attacking his sleeping relatives. That an 8-year-old boy would attack family members with a knife unless something fundamental was wrong with his character, even the most sympathetic observers could not argue. For dealing with violent children, the legal system of 1867 had no framework. For adult prosecution, Timothy was too young, but for simple placement in an orphanage or reformatory, too dangerous. Throughout the region, the case created unprecedented challenges for Missouri's justice system, attracting attention from legal scholars and medical professionals. After weeks of legal wrangling and consultation with experts from as far away as Boston and Philadelphia, a compromise was reached. To the custody of the Missouri State Hospital for the Insane in Fulton, Timothy would be remanded, where he would be studied and treated by the most advanced alienists available in the region. Completely, the decision satisfied no one. For murder, prosecutors wanted Timothy tried as an adult, while defense attorneys argued that no child so young could be held responsible for his actions. Between those who believed Timothy could be rehabilitated and those who considered him incurably dangerous, medical professionals were divided. To accompany Timothy to the hospital and remain there for 3 months, documenting the boy's behavior and working with hospital staff to develop an understanding of what they were dealing with, Dr. Samuel Harding volunteered. Of antisocial behavior in children, the resulting case study became one of the first systematic examinations, though it would not be published until decades after the events. With the same calculating intelligence he had shown on the farm, Timothy adapted to hospital life. He quickly learned to mimic appropriate emotions and responses, convincing several staff members that he was making remarkable progress in overcoming his traumatic episodes. When discussing his crimes, Timothy would cry convincingly, express remorse that seemed genuine, and display what appeared to be authentic gratitude for the care he was receiving. But that Timothy was merely studying the people around him, learning to manipulate them more effectively was observed by Dr. Harding. What amounted to a comprehensive catalogue of human emotional responses had been created by the boy, and he could reproduce these signals with remarkable accuracy despite feeling none of the underlying emotions himself. The subject displays remarkable cognitive abilities coupled with complete absence of genuine emotional response, Dr. Harding wrote in his detailed reports. He has learned to simulate normal human reactions with sufficient skill to deceive casual observers. But extended observation reveals the performance to be entirely artificial. Timothy understands happiness as the face people make when they want something good to continue, and sadness as the face people make when they want others to help them. But he has never actually experienced either emotion himself. Of Timothy's violent fantasies and future plans, Dr. Harding's evaluation also revealed the extent. When the boy believed he had gained Dr. Harding's trust by pretending to be fascinated by the scientific approach to studying human behavior, Timothy began sharing ideas for future experiments that made his past crimes seem almost restrained by comparison. He has developed elaborate scenarios for testing human responses to various forms of psychological and physical torture, Dr. Harding reported confidentially. His plans demonstrate remarkable creativity and attention to detail, as well as a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. If he were allowed to mature and gain additional resources, he would likely become one of the most dangerous individuals in American history. That Timothy remained at the facility for 18 months, the hospital records show. During that time, several unexplained incidents occurred that bore the hallmarks of Timothy's methods. In circumstances that suggested accident or natural causes, but which showed patterns of deliberate planning when examined carefully, other patients were found dead. From apparent heart failure after interacting with Timothy, 3 elderly patients died, though all had been in relatively good health previously. What appeared to be accidental falls that resulted in serious injuries were suffered by 2 younger patients. But both incidents occurred in areas where Timothy had been seen earlier in the day. Most disturbing were the reports of patients who claimed Timothy had been visiting them at night, standing silently beside their beds and watching them sleep. Who worked closely with Timothy, hospital staff also began experiencing unusual problems. After spending time with the boy, several nurses reported persistent nightmares, dreams that often featured detailed scenarios of violence and death. To other wards, 2 attendants requested transfers, claiming that they felt constantly watched, even when Timothy was supposedly confined to his room. That the boy had been keeping a secret journal was discovered by Dr. Martha Fitzgerald, who had been brought in to provide additional expertise in treating Timothy. Paper and pencil for therapeutic writing exercises had been convinced to be provided to him by Timothy from one of the nurses, claiming that recording his thoughts and feelings would help him process his emotions more effectively. Exactly what Timothy had claimed appeared to be contained in the journal: daily entries describing his thoughts, his regrets about past actions, and his hopes for future rehabilitation. In its language and emotional content, the writing was appropriately childlike, and it painted a picture of a deeply troubled but fundamentally redeemable young person struggling to overcome traumatic experiences. But familiarity with coded communication systems was included in Dr. Fitzgerald's training in European psychiatric techniques. When she applied analytical methods to Timothy's journal, she discovered that the innocent-seeming entries contained a sophisticated cipher system. In disturbing detail, the decoded messages revealed Timothy's true thoughts and plans. Rather than experiencing remorse or rehabilitation, he was conducting a systematic study of the hospital, its staff, and its security procedures. Not merely to escape, but to use his time in confinement to develop more advanced techniques for manipulation and murder was his goal. Day 47. Dr. F believes my tears during today's session were authentic, read one decoded entry. Her response pattern indicates increased sympathy and reduced suspicion. Estimate 3 more weeks of consistent performance will be required to establish sufficient trust for physical contact during sessions. Of Timothy's coded journal led to an immediate tightening of security procedures and a reduction in his contact with hospital staff, the discovery. But with characteristic flexibility, Timothy adapted to these changes, shifting his focus from manipulation to information gathering about hospital routines and potential escape routes. Under circumstances that were never fully explained, in the summer of 1868, Timothy Caldwell disappeared from the Missouri State Hospital. That he had somehow managed to escape during a transfer between buildings despite being under constant supervision by multiple guards was concluded by the official investigation. That Timothy's escape had been far more sophisticated than the official report suggested was suspected by Dr. Harding. Throughout his confinement, the boy had demonstrated remarkable patience and planning ability, and it seemed likely that he had spent months preparing for his departure. That he had been manipulating the facility staff far more successfully than anyone had realized was suggested by evidence discovered after Timothy's disappearance. In the weeks before his escape, several guards reported having made small policy exceptions for Timothy, allowing him slightly longer exercise periods, providing him with additional reading materials, making minor adjustments to his daily routine that individually seemed harmless, but collectively may have created opportunities for escape. That facility and its personnel, he spent a year and a half studying, Dr. Harding wrote in his final report on the case. By the time he made his move, he understood the psychology of every person who worked there better than they understood themselves. His escape wasn't an act of desperation. It was the culmination of a carefully executed plan. In the months and years following Timothy's disappearance, Dr. Harding began collecting reports of suspicious deaths and accidents throughout the Midwest. That seemed consistent with Timothy's methods were hallmarks borne by many of these incidents: carefully staged accidents that resulted in death, evidence of systematic torture of animals, and the presence of a child who seemed unusually helpful and emotionally mature. That Timothy would now be older, potentially strong enough to overpower adult victims, and certainly sophisticated enough to avoid the mistakes that had led to his original capture was the challenge. His time of intensive study in human psychology, combined with his natural intelligence and complete lack of moral restraint, had created something unprecedented in American criminal history. The remaining years of his career were spent by Dr. Harding tracking these reports and attempting to develop a comprehensive understanding of what Timothy Caldwell represented. After his death in 1891, his private journals contained hundreds of pages documenting cases that might have involved Timothy, along with theoretical discussions about the nature of evil and the possibility that some individuals might be born without the capacity for moral reasoning. 4 decades after his disappearance, the broader implications of Timothy's case continued to influence discussions about criminal justice, child psychology, and mental health treatment. About the reliability of psychiatric evaluation, his ability to deceive trained professionals raised uncomfortable questions, while his manipulative skills highlighted the potential dangers of assuming that all children are inherently innocent and redeemable. After Thomas and Sarah recovered from their ordeal, the Caldwell farm was abandoned. In the place where they had unknowingly harbored a killer for nearly 2 years, neither could bear to remain. To the county, the property eventually reverted and was sold to developers in the 1890s, but for decades afterward, local residents avoided the area. Shortly after the boy's arrest, the cave where Timothy had conducted his experiments was sealed by Sheriff Crawford, but by those who knew of its significance, the location was never forgotten. That the cave was cursed and that animals would not graze in the surrounding area was claimed by local legend. To the Missouri Historical Society in 1923 by his daughter, who felt that the scientific value of her father's observations outweighed concerns about the disturbing nature of the content, Dr. Harding's journals were donated. In the Society's archives, the journals remain, available to researchers who can demonstrate legitimate academic interest in the development of psychological understanding. Publicly about their experience with Timothy, Thomas and Sarah Caldwell never spoke, but for the remainder of their lives, both lived under assumed names, apparently fearing that the boy might someday return to finish what he had started. In 1889, Sarah died, and in 1894, Thomas followed. Neither ever had children of their own. Just days before his death in 1891, in his final journal entry, Dr. Harding reflected on the broader implications of Timothy's case. I have spent 24 years trying to understand what Timothy Caldwell represented, and I fear I have reached a disturbing conclusion. Timothy was not an aberration. He was a glimpse into what human beings might become when stripped of the moral and emotional constraints that we consider fundamental to our nature. If he survived to adulthood, then somewhere in America, there walks a man who understands human psychology better than any trained professional, who can manipulate people with supernatural skill, and who views the rest of humanity as nothing more than subjects for experimentation. This mystery shows us that evil can wear the face of innocence, and that our assumptions about childhood and human nature may be dangerously naive. The case of Timothy Caldwell forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of moral development and the possibility that some individuals may be born without the capacity for empathy or conscience that we consider fundamental to humanity. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or might there be more to Timothy Caldwell's fate than the official records suggest? Leave your comment below and let us know your thoughts about this disturbing chapter in American history. If you enjoyed this tale and want more horror stories like this, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries as dark and complex as this one. Remember, the truth is often more terrifying than fiction. And history holds secrets that continue to challenge our understanding of human nature. See you in the next video.